William Clark Quantrill was born on July 31st, 1837, in Ohio to Thomas Henry and Caroline Cornelia Clark. Quantrill was very educated, and he became a teacher like his father. It was around the same time that his father died, and he became the man of the house. After a year of teaching, he decided to leave home and head to Illinois, and then to Fort Wayne, Indiana, where he would teach and work in the lumber yard just to scrape up enough money to get by. This was still not bringing in enough money, so he then turned to gambling, and this is where his rebellion started. Later on, he was able to find a couple of friends that would get him to move to Missouri to become farmers. Their names were Henry Torrey and Harmon Beeson, and they would eventually make him a deal that he couldn't pass up. Quantrill would trade out his work for the land that they would buy. Quantrill just couldn't do it anymore, so he decided to sell the land. Mr. Torrey and Mr. Beeson decided to take him to court and get their money. The court ruled in their favor, but Quantrill was not going to pay that money back. A few years went by, and he ended up in Lawrence, Kansas. There he was teaching again and trying to make a living. The next year the school was closing, and he was up against the wall. This is when he devoted all his time to doing whatever it took to make a dollar. He got into cattle rustling, bounty hunting, and also made money off of runaway slaves that he would catch and take back to their rightful owners. He joined different groups throughout his time that specialized in committing these crimes. Quantrill would soon leave those groups and start his own, which consisted of William Haler, George Todd, Joseph Gilchrist, Perry Hoy, John Little, James Little, Joseph Barbary, William H. Gregg, James Hendricks, and John W. Coger. After the Lawrence, Kansas raid that left the whole town in ruin, Quantrill and his men decided to travel south to Baxter Springs, Kansas. Quantrill, being the Confederate guerrilla chieftain, was leading his men down to Bonham, Texas, where they would spend their winters. They had passed through Baxter Springs a few different times. This is when the Baxter Springs massacre was going to happen. Major General James G. Blunt of the Union forces got word that Fort Smith was being threatened, so they were on their way to help. They left on October 4th and stayed at a few different places, and arrived at Baxter Springs on October 6th. There they met up with the garrison, which was a mixed group of both infantry and cavalry. There was also the Kansas 2nd Colored Volunteer commanded by Lieutenant R. E. Cook and Company D, 3rd Wisconsin Cavalry Regiment commanded by Lieutenant John Kreitz. They eventually all got prepared to head out on their way to Fort Smith. At this time, Quantrill sent out Captain Dave Poole to scope out Baxter Springs and saw that the Union was just departing. He also had Captain William H. Gregg lead an advancement on Baxter Springs. Quantrill was at this time starting to explain the way he wanted to attack. He wanted to make the attack east to west. He had around 150 men that he had on the right flank, and Captain Poole and his men could be on the left flank. The Union men were at this time eating lunch and had all their guns put away. And this is when the Confederate guerrillas made their surprise attack. It went from 1 minute hearing mouths smacking on the food and their guns firing and hearing the yells of men. General James G. Blunt was the commander of the Union troops. Lieutenant Pond was totally surprised because he was eating alone in his tent. Only a few of Pond's men were killed during this. Eventually the Union got their weapons and it made the Confederate retreat. And the Confederates were getting back. General Blunt's men were quite surprised, but just thought it was the garrison from Baxter Springs. He eventually figured out that the Confederates were dressed up as the Union men. The guerrillas started firing shots at Blunt's men, and Blunt could finally tell they were not part of the Union. Major Benjamin S. Henning was under General Blunt. When he saw this fighting at first, the Confederates had surrounded the whole camp. A couple of other scouts joined Major Henning as they saw some of the guerrillas taking hostage some federal prisoners. So they killed the guerrillas and the hostages ran for safety. At this time, Quantrill and Blunt were getting close. and the Confederates were riding straight to the Union troops, firing their guns. Major Henning had hopes of stopping the guerrillas, but that didn't last very long. Quantrill's men were firing non-stop. Blount was able to escape the guerrillas as he had a very superior horse compared to the others. Blount went back to Baxter Springs and ordered Lieutenant J.E. Tappan with a few troopers to keep an eye on the guerrillas. It turned into a battle of every man for themselves at Baxter Springs. At Baxter Springs was Lieutenant Pond, where he was still firing at the Confederates, but he wasn't accomplishing anything. There were bodies that lay all over the battlefield and very few horses running lost. There were many men, some children and women that were killed. At 2 p.m. the fighting was said to be over, and many of the guerrillas started going through all of the dead men's belongings and started drinking. It was said that Quantrill was holding a gun over a man that was about to die, and he said, Tell, O God, that the last man you saw on this earth was Quantrill." Blount was still waiting to get another shot at the guerrillas, but he wasn't ever able to do it. Blount very soon came back and saw all that were dead. There were around 85 men who were killed. Quantrill only reported a few dead, but the Union said that there were around 20 to 30 Confederates that were found dead on the battlefield. The Union did not have a very good showing at Baxter Springs, and Blount would eventually be replaced by Major General Samuel R. Curtis.